So we completed iteration number 5, and this video will cover iteration 6, which is again it's an extra credit advanced topic saving to a file. I want to say that this is an advanced topic. It's not difficult for you, but I want you to know that it requires a little bit of attention as there are multiple issues. The goal of this is to save to a file. So far, everything you've done, once you close the app, it's gone. You can save to the user defaults like we learned how to do before, but that's once you turn on your phone, it's going to be gone. And if you have too many contacts, really you can't use the user defaults for that. So your solution is to go to a file or go to a database or go to a server. So for this class, we're just going to implement file, and the database and the servers will be topics that will be covered in the advanced iOS class. So let's spend a few moments here. I'm not going to take much time in the implementation, but we need a few moments. So 6.1 problem formulation. And I wanted to define the scope here. So the scope is multiple parts. When the app loads, the contacts are loaded from the file. The first time the app loads, there is no file. The app will create the file and save sample contact. When a new contact is added, the app saves to a file, as well as when a change happens, like when we delete or move. So there's a file on the system, and everything the app does, it changes with the is reflected in the file and permanently stored in the file. To test this case, we simply need to close the app and open it again, even turn off your phone and open it again, and all the contacts should be the same, should be there. Close app and turn off your phone. In our case here, the simulator, I stop the simulator and run it again. The formulation, in the solution formulation, all the work here is in the model. So really the view and the controller, nothing changes. All the work that need to be done will be in the model. So the changes we need to make are in the contact and in the contacts data source. To figure out what we need to do, let's take a look at what the file system look like on your device. So I want to point you to this document on the Apple developer website. If you go there, or if you Google File System Programming Guide, this is a very important document if you want to learn more about the file system. As you can see in the table of content, it covers so many different topics. For us, just the file system basic is what I would like you to read. There are multiple topics here. iOS file system, that's what we're concerned about. OS X, that's your computer, you don't have to worry about that. And then some information about security. So we want to read about the iOS file system. So this diagram is sufficient for me now. So I want you to know a couple of things. The app comes with a bundle, and this is the every app has its own sandbox for security and to isolate the app within the operating system. and the app is given access to some containers. The app has access to the bundle container, the data container, and the iCloud container. The bundle container, that's what we have been using in the past. Remember project number 1 and project number 3, we have used a resource file and the property list file and put quotes and put units. The property list file is saved with the app bundle in the bundle container, and we accessed it by getting a reference to the app bundle, and from there we were able to find the app. The app bundle is a read-only. You think of the container or the bundle as a directory. It's a read-only, meaning you can't write to the app bundle. The app cannot write to its bundle. The app can write, however, to a folder called data, the data container, and that data container is organized with documents, library, and a temporary folder, and you can create other folders in it as well, but that's kind of the standard. And if you scroll down, it tells you the intended usage of each one of those for the library, the temporary, the documents, and the app bundle, and then some suggestions on where you should put your app files. So the project that the file that we have, which has the contacts of a user, are the user generated contacts. This is a directory, and that should then go to the documents directory. And that's where we save. And this directory is backed up by iTunes when the user backs up their phone. So we will save to that documents directory. Now, how to access the files? You can come here, accessing files and directory, and there are different information that you can search through, and I will just show you what we can do in here. So, but before we can save information, so in the data source, we're gonna add a save function, and then we're gonna add a load function. But the data that we're gonna save and load is contained in a mutable array, but each element in the mutable array is a contact. But the contact is something we created. So for it to work well with the mechanism to write to a file and read from the file, the contact need to implement or abide by a protocol called the NSCoding protocol. The purpose of this is to teach the operating system, or to the operating system can write to the file and read from the file, but it needs to know some information. And since we created contact, not the developers of the operating system, they do not know what we are going to create. So to create a common language between us and them, these protocols, and we've used them before with the picker view, and we use them with the text field. So this is another one in order to make our contact capable of being saved to a file and retrieved from a file. Since this is something new, let's take a quick look at it in the ABI documentation. If I type the NSCoding, so this is, we're looking for the protocol here. NSCoding protocol. So here is the seems like I hit quickly. So the NSCoding protocol has some required methods. It has two methods, one to initialize and one to encode. There's some description here. It's both are required, the init with coder and the encode with coder. This is basically specifies what variable we are going to, the breakdown of our contact for each variable that is going to be saved or that is at the primitive type that the operating system uses. Let's see how we can use this. It's going to be confusing unless we work with it. So here is the contact, and we'll implement the NSCoding by adding the comma and specifying the name of the protocol that we want to implement. Once you do that, the operating system will tell you, hey, you do not conform to the protocol because you did not add the two methods that are needed. So we'll come here outside the other methods and implement the NSCoding methods or functions. Xcode is tired, it seems. So the first function is an init, and this function needs to come exactly the same as it is written. So this is a required function. And since it is in the initializer, we will need to specify it is required and another keyword called convenience, and then the init coder. And this initializes, which will be that you're loading it from, you're decoding it. So what's happening here for the data to go to the operating system, it needs to be handled in a certain way because you're now translating from your type, the string and the text, into the bits that the system deals with. So here we are in the init, we're loading it from the file. So we'll decode each item and assign it to the first name. It might be easier to see first how we're gonna write it to the file so that you can appreciate the decoding part. So the function to decode is called the encode with coder, and this basically encodes each item. So I use the coder, which is provided by the operating system, and there are two here, I need only one, and then I'll say decode or encode object. So you can encode all the different types, the float, the integer, but here we're gonna encode an object. We have strings, and there isn't one for a string, so anything that's not there we specify what it is, and we need to encode this is not the one we want to use. There's one with key, so we need to specify a key for it so that we can decode it. So we can what we're saying here, in order to encode the contact, you will need to encode the first name and in a key called first name. And then we'll do this for each one of the attributes or the data items that we have. So last name, and we'll give it the key last name. And then the email address, and we'll give it email address. So when we save the contacts to the list, it's gonna save the contact details with each one of those keys. So when we decode it back, we're gonna ask for the data associated with this key. So to decode it back, we assign to the first name, and then we get the decoder, and we'll say decode object for key. Decode object for key. So we'll look for it. So each type has a decoder. So a decode object for key, and for the first name, the key is first name. and then the same for the last name. So decoder, and then the code object for key last name, and then finally the email address, and then email address. The decode, since it is object not a string, we have to specify as a string. Say I want you to decode it as a string type. And before we do this, initialize internally. So we initialize the item. So we call our own initializer and then assign the content of the contact for each one of them. So that's the first thing that we need to do for the contact itself, is to make the contact capable of being saved to a file. Now in the data source, we need to save the file and load the file. And you have learned before, in order to access a file, we have to get a reference to the directory. And we got a reference to the directory, then we get a reference to the path of the file. And in order to do this with the bundle, like we did with project number 1 and project 3 and project 4, we we sought the help of the NSBundle class and retrieved from the NSBundle the reference to the bundle. So in the files, there's something similar, but instead of an NSBundle, it's an NSFileManager. And so the file manager will give us a reference to the directories that we have access to, and from there we get a reference to the file. But since we're gonna do that in both the saving and the loading, let's make a function that does only that, gives us the reference to the file. So let's add here function to get a reference to the file. Since this is a repeated task, we'll just do it in a function by itself. So we say function, we'll call it get file URL, and it does not gonna receive any parameters, but it's gonna give us back a URL. So the first thing to get the file URL is to get a reference to the file manager. So we'll say let file manager equal NSFileManager, and we'll say give us the default manager. Very similar to what we did with the NSBundle, but now because we don't have access to the bundle container, we get the file manager. Then we get a reference to the documents directory or the home directory or container. So let home directory equal, and then we'll go to the file manager and say we need you to give us the URL for directory. And as you can see, there are multiple informations here that need to be provided. The first one is what directory do we want access to? And that directory, there are, as you can see, there are multiple in the diagram here. There are multiple directories that are defined, so we can get access to them through this enumeration from directory. So we say ns search, ns search path directory dot documents, and these are the different directories. So we're looking for the document directory that we have access to. So we give us a reference to the document directory. What domain? This is the user domain. So ns search domain mask, and then this is the directory for the user domain. So this is just values to indicate that this is the we want this for the user. We don't need to specify anything here. Do you want to create it? So if you say true and that document directory does not yet exist for this user, then it will create it. So we'll say true. If there is an error, what to do? Let's say null here and bypass the error for this case. So that will give us a reference to the home directory and use the binding with it here. So we got a reference to the home directory. Now from the home directory we get a reference to the file URL, to the URL of the file that we for the address book. So we'll say let file URL equal, and then we go to the home directory and say for the home directory we want to get a URL by appending path component. So we want a URL and we just want to add to the path component the name of the file. So I'm going to name it addressbook.data. And that will give us a URL for that file. And then return the file URL. So return file URL. So what this does, it just creates the file URL for us. Now let's see if we want to save the file. Function to save the address book contacts. We'll say function save or save contacts. First thing the function needs to do is to get the file to save to. So I'll say let file URL equal, and then call our own function get file URL. So that will execute all of this and give us the URL for the file. Now that I have the URL, I can save the contacts using something called NSKeyedArchiver. So the KeyedArchiver is a class that can archive or save files. So will has multiple functions. Will archive root object, and then what is the object I want to archive is contacts, and what is the file I want to archive to is the file URL, but it needs it as a string. So I call the path function, which gives me the path from a URL format to a string format, and this needs the optional binding. So that saves the contacts to a file. To load the contacts is a bit tricky because we have the situation where in the very first time you load, the file may not exist. So we need to check for that. So function to load the file. So we call it function load contacts. So the first thing is to get the file to load from. So let file URL equal get file URL. Then the next step is to check if the file is created or not. So I say if the file and I ask the file manager. So I need a file manager here for that. So I need the file manager so I can ask the file manager, I'll get the default manager, and then I'll ask if file exist, is file exist at path. And then use the file URL.path again to check if the file exists. If this is true, this means that the file exists, and as such I need to load the contents of the file. So I'll say let contents, whatever those contents are, and then I use the NSKeyedUnarchiver, and then unarchive object with file, and then provide the file path. So file URL.path. So that gives me the contents of the file, and I need to cast this content as a type, so I'm going to cast it as the type array. The NS mutable array and array are the same, and then add the contents to the contacts array. So I already have contacts, and I'll say add objects from array and then contents. So that goes inside the content. However, if the file doesn't exist, remember this works because contacts, when we initialize contacts in the beginning, it was initialized empty. So now I'm adding to it the content of the file. So if that is the case, if the file doesn't exist, then I need to save it for the first time. This is going to happen in the first time only. So in this case, then I want to first time get a sample contact. So add something to the array, so I'm not saving it empty. So I use the sample contact, and then add the contact to the array, which is I've done before, but I'm doing it here, and you'll see that I'm gonna remove it from where we've done it before. So sample contact, and then save to the file. So I can simply say save contacts. I could have wrote this again, but I can just save it from here. So I added the save file and load contacts, but save contact, load contacts, but we haven't used them. So let's go back and start. So when we first initialize the array, initialize the data source, I no longer need to create the sample contact. I don't need to do that anymore, but I need to load the contact. So I say load contacts. So the first time I want to load the contacts. Load contacts from file. So now when you initialize, first time you create an instance of the data source, the contacts are loaded. When you add a new contact, after you add a new contact, you want to save. So we say save contacts. When you delete a contact, you want to save. So we say save contacts. When you move contact, we want to save. So we say save contacts. So every time you make a change in the data list and you want to persist that change, we call the save contacts. Yeah, I hope you now see the value of creating those functions, that now in each one of those steps I'm simply just calling those functions and not repeating the instructions again. So now this should work, hopefully. So we'll run and see. So in the beginning, we should not see any difference. We should still see the sample contact. So here is the sample contact, but now this sample contact is, everything is saved to a file. So now let's add a new contact. save it, and now let me stop and run. This simulates you turning off your phone and turning the phone back on. You can see the new contact that we added still persists, because when you add a new contact, it adds it to the list, but also we added the save here. If we move contact, move the order, like replace them like that, and then close and open and run again, they will come back with they came back with their original order. So did we have a save? We had a save. So apparently there is something here that's not coming back in the same order. Let's add something else. And it could be that the order is not guaranteed, and that's the case. The order is not guaranteed. But if we delete an item, it is deleted. So let's save, and so it is deleted. And you can see things in here. I might have done something for the move, or it might be something that we can't control that order here. So that concludes this part. And if you want to play with this a little bit further and challenge yourself, I would recommend maybe try the sorting the elements of the array. Thank you.